4 entities. That is the University of Stellenbosch Business School, the University of Stellenbosch Business Education Function, our school, which is the School of Public Leadership, as well as the Institute for Futures Research. And as a part of our knowledge strategy, we are going to combine many of these entities in a solid capacity to improve the lives of citizens and people in this country. So I welcome you on behalf of the School of Public Leadership, but also on this campus, which we share with a number of other entities. Secondly, I would specifically want to welcome a couple of people. First of all, our 2 eminent speakers, which is Mr. Advocate Busi Pikoli. And for those of you who don't know, he's just recently been appointed as the Ombud for the Western Cape Police and in the Department of Provincial Safety and Security. And he was also recently involved in the Kailicha Commission of Inquiry. And then Professor Pierre de Vos. Now, Pierre and I have never personally met, but we are very good social media friends. So I have very few other friends. I only have friends on social media because when they meet me, they tend to sort of find that they don't want to really be my friend. No, that's not true. So to them, a very, very hearty word of welcome. We have started the series also with other people, and specifically the Center for Constitutional Rights, of which Advocate Johan Kriel is here, and with the support, and for all of these people, you can, just after I've done this, give a round of applause of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and we've got Dr. Holger Dix here. These people have been supporting this series. And in the final part, before you give the applause, is for Radio KC, and we've got their radio station here, and we want to use all of the options and opportunities that we have to spread the message of constitutionalism in South Africa. Radio KC has 108,000 listeners, and probably are about 50,000 or 60,000 listening now, and they operate mostly in the Drakensberg area of our local province, and they do fantastic work also on the education side. Now, for all of those people, and furthermore, one more, the team from both the center as well as the School of Public Leadership, all of these fantastically bright young people who assist us. Can you give all of these people a round of applause? Something about the series. This is the 3rd session of this series, and I would just like us to show some respect and some empathy and sympathy. You will recall, for those of you who were here, that the previous one was the last, one of the very last opportunities where we were fortunate enough and blessed to have our previous rector, Professor Russell Botman, speaking on youth and leadership. So could we just for a moment have a moment of silence, because as you know, he has since passed away. Thank you. The first one was addressed by President de Klerk, former President de Klerk, and we talked about the state of the constitutional state. The second one was on the youth and constitution. This one is on Chapter 9 institutions, and I can now announce the future is right. We have Dr. Dix here, and he is going to agree. He's not realized that yet, but he's going to agree to fund this for next year as well. Thank you, Dr. So, but we still have one more event in this year's series, and that will be on the 5th of December, so you can diarize that now. It will be standing room only, and we will have it on the 5th of December, which is a Friday, in the afternoon. It won't be a breakfast discussion. So we will have it from 3 o'clock till about 5 o'clock. And instead of serving breakfast, we will be serving what my father used to call, when he was at the municipal conferences, sierwyn and snacks. In any case, and this one will be on the media, public leadership and the constitution. And the speakers who have agreed to join us will be Mr. Mondli Makanya, as well as Mr. Max de Prier. So we will be sending out the invites for that soon. Now, for now, that is what I need to say. And just to say again, we sincerely appreciate the effort that you put in to come to this. And we hope that we can serve our roles and fulfill our roles and our purpose to educate about the Constitution. I'm now going to hand over to the moderator, Dr. Dirk Brandt, and he will then introduce the speakers.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to invite the two speakers now. We have asked both of them to prepare a short input on the topic of the Chapter 9 institutions supporting constitutional democracy and leadership in the country. Professor De Vos is professor in constitutional law in particular at the University of Cape Town. He has published a lot in this field and he has certainly strong views on constitutionalism, and I invite Pierre, please, to address us.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thanks for the organizers for inviting me to come and speak here on Chapter 9 institutions. When I had to think what I was going to say, I recall that several years ago I was asked by the late Professor Adenauer to be the advisor, the legal advisor to the ad hoc committee reviewing Chapter 9 institutions. And the first day I went to meet Professor Asmal, I was dressed like this, and he said, "What the hell are you doing? You're not wearing a suit." But I decided I wasn't going to wear a suit today in any case. Having mentioned that report, the Chapter 9 institutions as envisaged in the Constitution and as is made clear in the Asmal report, is supposed to support constitutional democracy. And it's supposed to do so in a complicated way, because if it works well, the Chapter 9 institutions are supposed to do two things that seem in tension with one another, as I understand it. On the one hand, they have to work with the government, with institutions, public institutions, to assist those institutions to govern better, to make better decisions, to ensure that when mistakes are made, they are rectified. But implicit in that is the second role that they fulfill, and I think this is where we are now at, because of course this whole discussion is happening against a very specific background, the background of Nkandla. So the second thing they have to do is sometimes they have to act as the conscience of organs of state, and they have to call out maladministration, infringements of human rights, and so on. And then they will often clash with the organs of state, the very organs of state that they sometimes have to assist and work with. So I think it's actually a very difficult role that the Chapter 9 institutions have to fulfill, because on the one hand, they don't have the same kind of status and power we now know from the High Court judgment of courts of law, yet they fulfill this role that is somehow adjudicative in some way, but in another way is also assisting the administration. And I think for that reason it makes it very difficult. Having said that, it is clear, as it perhaps wasn't before, that these institutions are clearly independent. In the Asmal report, a lot was made about the independence of these institutions and that they had to be independent they had to be treated as independent, that they cannot be seen as part of the government. Yes, they have to assist the government, but they cannot be seen as part of the government. And that ad hoc committee, so it's a committee of Parliament itself. Parliament has now forgotten that it had ever said so, but that committee itself said that these institutions, quoting from the Constitutional Court judgments about the Electoral Commission, these institutions need to be properly funded. They need to be, the funding really needs to be outside of the funding that is given to specific departments, in the same way that the courts are funded, so that to ensure its independence. Also, these institutions, although they sometimes have to assist organs of state, they don't form part of government. They're not part of the government system. They don't form part of the cooperative government provisions in the Constitution that says that all government departments at various spheres have to work together with one another. So it's not the same. They're not in the same league as, say, different spheres of government. This was confirmed now by the High Court in the most recent judgments about the SABC ignoring the findings of the public protector. So the independence is very important. It's been confirmed both by the Parliament and now by the court. The problem is what happens. No, before I get there, I want to say something else. Something else that was mentioned in the report, because now when we speak about Chapter 9 institutions, we often think of one particular institution, Thuli Madonsela and the public protector. But of course, there's a whole lot of Chapter 9 institutions. There's you see, I can't even remember their names because they don't always do their work very well. The Commission for Gender Equality. There's the commission with a long name. The Commission for the Promotion and the Protection of Religious and Ethnic and everybody else. I can't remember. And then there is the Human Rights Commission, the Auditor General, the Electoral Commission. In that ASMAL report, which has never been really considered or implemented, there was a very strong recommendation made that some of these institutions should be amalgamated into one body. The Gender Commission, the commission with a long name, and the Human Rights Commission, to create a sort of super human rights commission. The argument was that, and at that stage, of course, the public protector wasn't a person who actually made decisions based on the law and the principles. So the Human Rights Commission was really the big hope of the Chapter 9 institutions. And so at the time, the argument was the Human Rights Commission should be strengthened, because one of the big problems with constitutionalism in South Africa is that we have this beautiful constitution. We have a constitution with one of the best Bill of Rights in the world. But most people find it very difficult or even impossible to access their rights and to have them enforced, because it is very expensive to go to a lawyer and to take a case to the court, as you probably all know. And so the argument was that you really need one Human Rights Commission who can do the two things together, as I explained it when I started my speech. On the one hand, it will work with government to promote human rights culture, say, for example, in the police. People don't want to hear about human rights in the police, but actually it's rather important, otherwise the police kill all of us who haven't committed any crimes. To promote human rights, but then also to take individual cases, in the same way that we now see the public protector taking many individual cases, individual complaints, trying to resolve it, and to litigate on the behalf of ordinary citizens. Because one of the big problems I think that we have in South Africa is that the constitution is not real for most people. It is not something that is accessible, or it is not something that is seen to make a difference in people's lives. Because even if you have rights, even if the rights are protected, even on paper, the Constitutional Court has given the most beautiful judgments that confirms the rights, ordinary people cannot access them. So the argument was the Human Rights Commission should do that and should become almost like the legal resources center of the state, to take the state to court when it doesn't do its job properly. That has never been implemented for reasons that the politicians may be able to answer better than I would. I will just leave it there. But that recommendation of creating the Superhuman Rights Commission alerts us to something else, which I've slightly alluded to before, and that is that when one talks about Chapter 9 institution, there's a tendency to actually to think of these institutions not in terms of the structure and the architecture of the Constitution as a whole, but to think of them in terms of the personalities and of the moment. And so at the moment, of course, we all know that the Chapter 9 institution that is probably doing that is the champion of the chattering classes, like everybody sitting in this room, is the public protector. So the public protector, all the emphasis is on the public protector. It is not on the Auditor General, it is not on the Human Rights Commission, it is not on the Commission for Gender Equality, or even the commission with the long name. You see, I don't even know the name of that commission. And the reason for that is because the public protector seems to be the, well, we won't say the great white hope, but the great hope that is going to save the democracy, that is going to fight corruption, that is going to, on behalf of all of us, is going to eradicate all kinds of maladministration in the world. I think that that is a problematic way of responding to constitutionalism. Constitutionalism and the Chapter 9 institution within that constitutional framework, yes, sets out structures, but those structures are sometimes stronger, sometimes they are weaker. And one mustn't, I think there's a danger that one supports certain principles or certain powers for Chapter 9 institutions based on an individual person. One should rather take the long view, in my view. So if one thinks now about the public protector, a few weeks, 2 weeks ago, there was a court judgment in the High Court which said that the public protector's findings are not binding. That the public protector is not a court of law, but that the findings cannot be ignored, that the findings has to be considered, that they must be implemented. If they are not implemented, they can be rejected, but they can only be rejected on rational grounds, and it will only be rational grounds to reject them if you take, or if you have regard to the fact that all organs of state has a constitutional duty to protect and advance the effectiveness and the independence and the dignity of the public protector. So it's actually quite a strong version of rationality that the court imposed on them. And many people complained, and the public protector, I've been fighting with her, I've been telling her she mustn't appeal the judgment, she doesn't want to listen to me. She doesn't seem to listen to anyone. It seems to me that is an appropriate, balance to strike, because in 2 years' time, Tuli Madonsela will not be there. Somebody else will be appointed to the Public Protector's Office, and then that person is going to make findings, and then if those findings are bindings, even if they are completely irrational, even if they are based on complete political considerations, then the first one is going to complain is Alan Zille here in the Western Cape Parliament is going to say, these people think they are too big for their boots, they want to tell us what to do. So one must be very careful what principles you are actually envisaging, what principles you're actually supporting. And for that reason, I think, as I've said, I think the judgment in the High Court is more or less correct. Some people disagree with me, but I think it's more or less correct. It strikes more or less the right balance. I suspect that the Constitutional Court is more or less going to affirm it, perhaps explaining that rationality test that I've been speaking about in a better way. But having said all that, I think what the debate in the South African context about the public protector, especially now, highlights for us is that the Chapter 9 institutions work best when the government of the day wants them to work. It works best when the government of the day is agreeable for these institutions to assist it in governing better. There's very little in the legal field that can be done if on a specific issue, for very specific political reasons, the government of the day decides, well, we don't want to be assisted in governing better on this particular point. Then is when the politics has to kick in. And I think in South Africa, the big problem is, and the debate, or the whole debate about Chapter 9 institutions, and even about courts and the role of courts in enforcing the Constitution, is that we often conflate political process of accountability with the more legalistic processes of accountability. And we are all a bit lazy, and we want to get the courts, the public protector, the Human Rights Commission to do what often is the hard and difficult political work of holding the members of the executive organs of state accountable. And so we put our trust in these institutions, not thinking that, okay, yes, as I said, in 2 years or a year and a half, I think Ms. Madonsela, Advocate Madonsela, will be retiring, there will be somebody else, and then we're going to all rush like lemmings to another Chapter 9 institution or to another body and say, this one is going to save us. But those bodies cannot save us if we need saving, yeah. What is going to save us is ourselves. I'm sounding like Barack Obama by now. And so, Chapter 9 institutions are important. Sometimes they work very well. When we did the work with Professor Aspel for the ad hoc committee, I was very surprised because at the time, I must confess, I was a little bit cynical about even some institution like the Public Protector. Remember, it was the time before Thuli Madonsela. And I discovered, my goodness, every day, it's never reported in the newspapers, but every day the Public Protector in the less political matters does brilliant work. The Public Protector, somebody doesn't have an ID book, the Home Affairs doesn't want to do that. The Public Protector goes, fights with the Department of Home Affairs, use the persuasion of our office, the power of our office, the influence, and gets that person an ID book. In those cases, it works well. In the high-profile political cases, like with Nkandla, I think it's a little bit naive to think that the Public Protector or the Human Rights Commission, if it was a human rights issue, or even the Constitutional Court, is what is going to really ensure that members of the executive are held accountable. The ultimate form of accountability is at the ballot box. And people vote governments in and out at election time. And they vote for the party that represent their interest, or that they believe most closely represent their interest. At the moment, the vast majority of South Africans believe that the ANC government represent their interest in the best possible way, because the opposition parties have not been very good at convincing people that they represent people in a better way. And so when we talk about institutions like the Public Protector, like the Human Rights Commission, like the Auditor General, all these institutions, they are very important. They can play a very important role. Sometimes in the non-political cases, they are very decisive. But that in itself, I think we mustn't kid ourselves and think that these institutions, or even the court, is something that is the only thing that can safeguard a democracy, that can hold people accountable, and so on. So maybe that is not a very popular view, but I think if you play the long game, you have to understand that there's politics involved, and that we, at the moment, and this is my last point, we live in a democracy that the political scientists call a one-party dominant democracy, that in such a democracy, these institutions will be weakened. It happens, whether it's Mexico or Japan or Italy, where there's one party in power for a very long time, where there's not a great likelihood that the party would lose power at the next election. Constitutional institutions are weakened, and just because on paper they are good doesn't really help us. What needs to change for those institutions to play a more effective role, also not only in the cases where that are not political, but also in the more political cases, is for there to become for there to be more political accountability. And for that to happen, the political dynamic in South Africa has to change. And that's really all I wanted to say. I see my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vos. And we've already started or spent quite a few years in the criminal law field. Now we have competition here. And now, most recently, he's taking up a new challenge, and that to fill the position, the first one in the country, of Ombud for community safety in the Western Cape. And in a limited sense, that the creation of that institution, I see also is a mechanism to strengthen constitutional democracy. So, Busi, with that, I think it will be interesting to see what you make of the position, but also to hear your views on the Chapter 9 institutions and strengthening constitutional democracy. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sure you're wondering why a non-academic like me is responding to an academic. Let me first confess that I got a lot of money. I'm from the University of Stellenbosch, in Stellenbosch. I'm to blame for that. But I'm happy to be here, and thank you very much for this invitation. I was not asked to prepare anything except to respond to what Pierre has to say. And I must say that it's going to be a bit boring, because I think it's most of it. Just perhaps to lay the framework of our discussions, which is our constitutional democracy. That, our preamble to the Constitution makes it quite clear that as we set up a new society in South Africa, we want to recognize the injustices of the past, the suffering of the past, that the Constitution itself then should reflect those struggles that we waged and ultimately won. And therefore, it is an embodiment of our aspirations as we seek a new society in South Africa. Then within that framework, there's a recognition that our constitution is the supreme law. And all laws have to be consistent with our constitution. Now, this is a radical departure from the past arrangement, where we had the supremacy of parliament, or parliamentary sovereignty. But also the problem that we seem to be experiencing currently is that some politicians seem to be a little bit nostalgic about the days when we had parliamentary supremacy, which of course cannot be consistent with the new values that we have in our constitution. Now, the establishment of these 6 institutions, and I'm sure Mr. Nesco will be happy if I say his commission is the one that protects and promotes cultural, religious, and linguistic communities. That's the correct name here. I'm sure we'll never forget that name now. Because actually it is an important commission. Perhaps we need to know more about it and the work that is doing and how that work then gets integrated, in the overall community of our society. Because amongst other things, it's supposed to bring unity and peace amongst the various communities in terms of respecting the diversity of our society. Therefore, it has got a very important role to play. And I'm sure we will see that. Having said that, Pierre says that these institutions are not going to save us, but we will save us. We'll save ourselves. What does that mean? I suppose when we set up these institutions and said that they are aimed at supporting and strengthening our democracy, we wanted to make sure that we do not revert to the past practices. They are meant to also circumscribe the powers of the executive, the public bodies, to make sure that they are exercised properly and function effectively. That's why they've been made independent. So that perhaps that's why Ms. Matonsela does not want to listen to anybody. Perhaps she takes the independence very seriously, which I have quite that we can't. Because amongst other things, independence means that you are also independent from your own family, from your own friends, from everybody else, as long as you try to do your work within the confines of the Constitution and the law. It doesn't mean that one does not make wrong decisions. But the challenge here is to allow people to make decisions when they are empowered to make such decisions. And obviously, they will not always be right. But of course, then our society has got other mechanisms of self-correcting. So when Pierre says that we ourselves we will save ourselves by resorting to the ballot box. Firstly, again, this is a value that we have in our constitution, that of having regular elections, having the multi-party system, of government. And then the IEC, which is one of those institutions, is a Chapter 9 institution, which has got to make sure that we have, fair elections that are credible. It is therefore very important for us to also say, as we try to save ourselves through the ballot box, we need a fearless IEC to make sure that indeed the results of the ballot, will be fair and a true reflection of the views of the population. It's an important point. Perhaps on the question of the public protector, which seems to be the institution that is really doing its work. Human Rights Commission, at some stage, it was quite visible. But perhaps coming back to the question of the personalities that lead these institutions, I was just wondering whether it is a coincidence that when the public protector's office was headed by the current head of the Human Rights Commission, we hardly heard of that institution. And now that that current head has moved over to the HRC, we hardly hear of the HRC. But the public protector's office has gained more prominence. Perhaps it's correct that the public protector takes this matter, to the constitutional court. Because whilst I agree that the finding of Judge Skippers in the Cape Town High Court, in very good judgment, is balanced. Therefore, the thing is for us to be clear and certain on section 1821C that says that the public protector has got power to take appropriate remedial action. Now, what is meant by that? Even after this judgment, in my mind, I'm not clear. So perhaps if we do get clarity on those issues, we might all understand. All the other issues, we've always known that the public protector is not a court of law, it's not a judge. I mean, those are not new issues. But it is important to clear this, because our public protector is not your classical or typical ombudsman's office like in Sweden. Ours is a bit different. And I think our judgments also need to take that into account. But also the fact that the judge has said, whilst her recommendations might not be binding, but the fact is that, those cannot be ignored either. Which will mean ultimately some of the students might have to go to court. And I agree with Pierre also when he says that things should not depend on the personality of the individuals, in our public offices. We need to have this certainty and clarity in our law, so that we know how to proceed. But also, for all these institutions to work, Parliament also has got to be conscious of its responsibility of holding the executive accountable. And perhaps when we discuss these issues, we should also discuss them within the broader ambit of our electoral law and system. And this is the question of PR and constituency-based. Because if we discuss them separately, we might not be able to be coherent in terms of our understanding and how these things work. The truth of the matter is that as our system is, when people get elected to parliament, they are specifically to the party, not to any constituency. This breeds then political patronage. Some MPs know that they might not have been into parliament, may not for some favors or so. And therefore they are there, on the back of some other people, and they can take it out at any time. Which then makes our members of parliament, subservient, to the ruling party bosses. Because should they be seen to be saying something contrary, then their positions will be made. Just kind of see some other points that perhaps the last point that I want to respond to is the question of the police and human rights. as Africans, we shouldn't fall into the trap that because of the high levels of crime in this country, that police have got the right to do whatever to suspects, to anybody, to peaceful demonstrators. You know, some people think that the question of policing is not compatible with the human rights culture, and that is incorrect. You know, we need to make sure that the police, when they carry out their functions, despite the high levels of crime, that they do that within the law. They must respect people's human rights. You know, it is a tragedy that the post-1994 government will have an incident like Marikana. It's unthinkable. You know? So policing and human rights are not incompatible. And there are no shortcuts in terms of solving the high levels of crime in this country. We once adopted the National Crime Prevention Strategy way back in 1996, which recommended a much more comprehensive approach to crime and integrated approach to crime, with emphasis on prevention. Perhaps these are the issues that we'll be able to engage in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague. I just want to also welcome here Minister Ivan Meyer, who has many titles, and I think in the context of today, his title would be a strong supporter of constitutional democracy. He's been a previous lecturer also at a school here, but I know constitutionalism is something very important for him. Ladies and gentlemen, this breakfast series is also about debate and engaging in issues. So we have about half an hour for question time. I will ask you to keep the questions short, to the point, so that we can take as many as possible and really have a good interaction. And for Pierre and Buti, if you could perhaps take the two chairs on the side here. Good. Can I see first questions? Marlon?
Thank you, Program Director. Just to make a confession, I am a commissioner of that thing with a very long name. And I'm eternally grateful that Buti actually knew what it was. So well done, and we'll put Pierre on a crash course on that. But, ladies and gentlemen, I will make a very brief observation. I just want to congratulate both the Centre and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and Professor Triller on the timing of this particular conversation, because I must say it has been particularly, I think, timeous, but also very, very lucid, enlightening in every respect. And I will certainly go back to the Commission, the chairman of which, and many of the members are based in Johannesburg, but I fortunately spend more time in the Cape as well. But I want to just say, the Calder Arsenal report, I want to give here this reassurance. In fact, our Commission had a plenary last week. At that very plenary, it was again decided it is now time to seriously engage with that report, which I've read a couple of times. It's very Calder Arsenal, of course. You know, there are no shades of grey or anything else. It's very cut and dry, and you know, he knew exactly what should happen everywhere. But it's not quite as simple as that in the real world. But there is going to be a re-engagement from the CRL. By the way, that is the short name for the Commission. Long name is difficult. But the CRL Commission is definitely going to be engaging with that in a number of ways. And all else I want to say about the Commission is we have taken a conscious decision that the focus of, because there are many things we could be doing, But the question of social cohesion, in our judgment, is absolute primary at this moment in time. So our focus is going to be very, very strongly on the whole challenge of social cohesion and with all the complexity of that challenge. So maybe we should appoint both these two gentlemen as honorary advisors. No pay, unfortunately. Budget is paltry, but to invite their insights on that question. And we are contemplating actually having a lecture series from different perspectives where that can actually be focused on one by one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Harlan?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Program Director. I'm not sure that I agree. You said I disagree with both yourself and Advocate Bukoli on the ballot box that can save us. Because if we give that power over, we are basically saying that we put our trust in political parties who every 5 years comes along and hopefully saves us. I think what is more important is that we spend more time empowering or engaging with communities in terms of their rights and their responsibilities. To be in a position, when I was in high school in the 80s, we had what is called awareness programs. So there was a higher level effort at conscientizing people about their rights and their responsibilities. The other day, the Human Rights Commission approached the community radio station in Paul wanting to do programs. So we asked them, do you have a budget? And they said, no, they don't have a budget. The media coverage is not allowed. So I don't think, although we are complying, we have these Chapter 9 institutions, in terms of, I think we lack in this country the will to educate people about their rights and to mobilize communities, because unless it comes from the ground, we cannot wait on the top to save us. It has to be a groundswell of support where local communities identify their power, and the institutional mechanisms are there. If you look at the ward committees at the local level, whether they are functional is another issue, because there again, I don't think there's the political will to ensure that we have or make participatory democracy work, which is a vital building block to our constitutionalism. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more, the next one here, and then respond to
Thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Temaletu Andile Elvis Kolo. I come from Nyanga. Yes, my question is based on the issue that we speak of these institutions, and then some of them, the people who are appointed there, as you have said, Mr. Bikoli, there are people who have benefits of some sort to the person who appoints them. So now, when they start to speak against that person, then they become the victim. And also now it becomes more than the institution, it becomes about the person. Typical saying will say about the person who's in charge of the IEC. The person is very much alleged with many incorrect doing within the law. And then that person will not be taken out because now is correctly, politically correct to the person who appoints those people there. So now how do you make sure that that does not happen? A person must be there because of they deserve to be there, and also they must not be account to certain people, but account to where they're supposed to be accounting to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First response from any one of you.
Okay. I think there were really two questions. On the first one, I don't think we disagree that much in the sense that that's why the reason why I spoke about the Human Rights Commission and why I think it's important that something like the Human Rights Commission or the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of Linguistic and Religious and Cultural Minorities or whatever should be empowered to assist ordinary people is exactly for that educative function. Because when I say that we will save ourselves, I don't mean only the people sitting in this room. I mean every South African, people who take the Constitution and its values to heart. The problem is we have a Rolls-Royce Constitution, but we come from a deeply oppressive fascist history, and the values, there's a gap, there's a values gap between what the Constitution promises to deliver and what many people experience in their own lives or even believe themselves. And we have to change that. So I think, and that happens in many different ways, including through the education, but not limited to that. On the question of appointing people and then if they are actually going to believe that they have been appointed on merit and start thinking for themselves, and then they get criticized for it. I think the dynamic we are seeing in South Africa is really related to what I referred to in my talk, the notion of the one-party dominance, where we've only had democracy for 20 years. Before that, there was no democracy. And so we haven't really built the institutions separate from a specific political party. So until such time as the politics change and governments change by course, every 5 years or every 10 years, somebody else coming into government, those institutions will become stronger. But one of the pathologies that this political scientists speak about when they speak about one-party dominance is exactly that those institutions were supposed to be independent. They are in a way captured by the party because there's a bit of too close relationship between the party and the state and between all the institutions and the state. And because the majority of the people in South Africa support a specific party because it has a strong hold on the hegemony in society, it makes the institutions less robust. If every 5 years people vote another party into power, the institutions will become far more robust. But that's going to take some time. You know, in Mexico, it took, I don't know, 90 years for the dominant party to lose control. So maybe some of us will be dead by then.
Hopefully not. Yeah, I'll be brief. On the second question, basically to say that we'll save ourselves, it's more a question of ensuring that we've got vibrant organs of civil society, you know, that keeps check on state power. And of course, we do this through public education, you know, public awareness issues, making sure that people are aware of their rights as well as their obligations. And of course, we've seen that had it not been for our vibrant organs of civil society, perhaps we could be having some laws which are a little bit draconian by now, especially as it relates to the media. But because we've been vigilant and we've been addressing these issues, taking them up, you know, that has proved to be quite useful. And also I must indicate that I also belong to, also Pierre and also Mr. Knight over there, we belong to CASA, the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. You know, we believe that we must make sure that we live our constitution. Not just talk it, but we live it. Therefore, it means that we must make sure that some of the rights that are enshrined in our constitutions, you know, are rights that are there for everybody and not to enjoy. Well, on the second issue, all I can say is that, you know, when it comes to the appointment of people who had some of these institutions, I always believe that it's more a question of a personal integrity as well of the individuals. Because that personal integrity also permeates, you know, to institutional integrity, so that people know what the function of that institution is. And we're talking here of independent institutions, which are supposed to be impartial, to be independent, you know, and only act in accordance with the Constitution and the law. Thanks.
Next round of questions. Here, there, and then Arnold there.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on that, on the last issue about the appointments and the revolving door policy that is emerging within Chapter 9s. And I think Pierre referred to it earlier, that the former head of the Human Rights Commission as former head of the Office of the Public Protector, is now the head of the Human Rights Commission. One of the key factors around the independence of Chapter 9 institutions is the fixed term, non-renewable term of office of the heads of those institutions. If you're going to have a system whereby people can move from one Chapter 9 to another, that undermines that integrity and the independence of those offices. And linked to that is a comment I want to make about the Electoral Commission. There is a process underway at the moment where there's a vacancy in the Electoral Commission. A shortlist of candidates has been announced, and that shortlist includes someone who serves as a commissioner on another Chapter 9 body.
My question relates to policing and human rights that Advocate Macaulay alluded to. I think that not only are they compatible, policing and human rights, but in this country they should be fundamentally intertwined, and that relates to what Professor De Vos said about accessibility to the Constitution. Because the majority of South Africans can't afford to access the legal system, Joe Public, like myself's first point of contact to the Constitution is a policeman in the street. So my question is, how can the Chapter 9 institutions, as part of that integrated approach that you're obviously analysing at the moment, Advocate Macaulay, contribute to what I would say, because they're independent, but they can only make recommendations, to the perception, both within the police as well as to the public, to improve that relationship at that public-private interface. So much so that you probably have to change an organisational culture within the police from one of a paramilitary organisation to like you would have fine in Europe now, where they're almost a link. And if you want the paramilitary, you go to the military, etc. So yeah, just how can they, part of the integrated approach, how can the Chapter 9 institutions within the recent judgments and that contribute to changing perceptions, both internally with the police as well as externally with the public? Thanks.
Arnold Smith, USB Executive Development. There seems to be a blind spot in our conversation, and that is about the executive itself. We keep on talking about the institutions around. We talk about saving ourselves, which I think is right, but I also agree with the sentiment, maybe not in the 90 years. So I want to take you back to 1989, not because I long back to those days, but there was a meeting where a group of people from the executive of then set up a meeting with the president and said, "Sir, this is enough." So how do we talk about responsible leadership within cabinet? How do we talk about responsibility and a culture of responsibility in that body? Or do we automatically assume that by the time that you have raised to that level of responsibility, all that remains is to collude with your colleagues and to keep the country in slavery?
Thank you, Dirk. Good morning, everybody. I think for me, it's really, the question is, what is the state of the state in South Africa? And I think there are three types of states. There's the successful state, there's a failed state, and South Africa is not a successful state, but South Africa is also not a failed state. But thanks to Professor Willie yesterday, sir, who taught us there's a middle ground, the fragile state. When I listen to this discussion, it confirms that South Africa is a fragile state. So how do we save a fragile state? That's the question. Because we were politically very much in a gridlock in reference to the powers of the executive and the attitude of the executive and the comments of the executive. Every cabinet meeting that I attend, I put next to my cabinet minutes the Constitution. And sometimes I have to remind my colleagues in cabinet that this doesn't speak to the values of the Constitution. And so that attitude is fundamentally important in terms of what I call the psychology of the executive in relation to the Constitution. So we are confirming here today, we are a fragile state. Advocate Macaulay, I think, gave me a good opening when he said we have to use Chapter 9 institutions and electoral reform. Today I want to propose two electoral reforms, and I will motivate it why. Firstly, what happens at the national parliament where after the election, the Chief Justice and at the provincial level, the Judge President presides over the meetings after the election. So the Chief Justice Mkhweng will call for nominations in the National Assembly, and in our case, in the provincial legislature, we call on Judge President Slokwe to oversee that transition after the election. But colleagues, what happens at municipal level? An official presides over that meeting. And given this corrupt relationship that you talked about, you can have a situation that one corrupt official will prevent a takeover as per the declaration of the IEC. And we have such an example, Advocate Pikoli, in this province, where the elections decided one thing, and a corrupt official who presided over that, instead of a judicial official, ignored the IEC declaration, and the party who lost the election is in power. Now that's a sign of a failed state. If you lose election and you're in power, you are heading towards a failed state. So the first electoral reform that I want to propose is that after a local government election, a judicial official must preside over the electoral, the constituting the first council after an election, like we do in the National Assembly and in the provincial legislatures, because it gives more credibility to the outcome of the election. Instead of a corrupt municipal manager who sits there and says, "Ooh, ja, ons gaan my iets op as hulle inkom. Wat 'n law kan ek gebruik om die ding te knoei?" So that is, I think, a very fundamental electoral reform. The second one that I want to propose, because we are discussing how can we save South Africa, and Advocate Pikoli say we can save South Africa by bringing electoral reform. So that's the first one. The second one that I want to propose, after an election at local government level, the IEC comes and declare the election free and fair, and then they walk away. So in other words, here's the election, we declared free and fair. In the car, back to wherever they go to. Then the local mafia decides otherwise. Like in Oudtshoorn, by the way. And then other parties have to fight it politically in court. I want to propose electoral reform in this regard. Whenever the IEC declare an election free and fair, and people behind their back carry on as business as usual, the IEC must take those people to court, and it's not up to political parties to fight these battles in court. So those are two electoral reforms to strengthen our constitutional democracy, because that is what's going to save South Africa. And I think, for me, those two things are fundamental towards 2016, because we are seeing an emerging pattern that once we've seen it in Tlokwe, we see it right now in this province, in Oudtshoorn, a party who lost the election is now in power. And this is the failure on the side of the IEC, and the failure that the judicial official is not chairing that first meeting after the election. I thank you.
Before you respond, just a comment. Listening to the debate here, it seems that living under a supreme constitution is really to see the constitution and constitutional democracy as a comprehensive picture created by a puzzle of different pieces. If you talk about the Chapter 9 institutions, you have to talk about accountability, about every other part of the Constitution as well. You cannot look at these issues in isolation. And I think Buzi alluded to that in the beginning. It seems to me that we, in understanding constitutional democracy, sometimes lose sight of the fact that we have to give effect to the whole Constitution. And that applies to the politicians, it applies to the citizens, it applies to all of the institutions created by the Constitution. Please, Pierre, Buzi, you want to go first?
I'm not so sure whether these were questions or more statements by all the previous speakers. And if there are questions, they are more rhetorical. Because basically, if we're just to talk about also the question of policing and human rights and the role and responsibility of the executive and parliament, insofar as the Chapter 9 institutions, there is a legal obligation, or rather a constitutional obligation on the part of all organs of state, to work closely and assist these public institutions. So again, it boils down to the question of leadership. Who is leading? And how do they understand their respective roles? Whether one is in the executive, or is in parliament, or is in any other state institution like the police or the defense force. The fact that in our constitution we have got Chapter 2, the Bill of Rights, should be paramount in the work that we do. The fact that our constitution also regulates the relationship and coordination of various state organs, from national, provincial, and local. All these things mean that we need to have then, that type of thinking and cooperation, coordination, and working together, guided by our constitution. I think it's very difficult to respond.
Yes, I really don't know how to respond, but I want to make 2 points. The first one about the culture in the police. It's once again that very difficult tension because on the one hand, somebody like the Human Rights Commission has a mandate to promote human rights, which could include promoting human rights in state institutions, in the Department of Home Affairs where they deal with asylum seekers, with the police when they deal with suspects or ordinary citizens. But I have been to these kind of human rights training sessions, which is often a 1 or 2 day jaunt somewhere on a wine farm or in a nice hotel. You tick the boxes, you attend the sessions, and then tomorrow you go back as a police officer and you clap the people there who come, you put in the back of the van, because there's no political will in the police leadership, in the executive, to actually make human rights part of the governance. So yes, you can do all these things, and the Human Rights Commission, the Commission for Gender Equality, the Commission with a long name, they all need to do these kind of promoting human rights exercises. But you also need something else, political will. And that brings me to the second point about the political will. Yes, in 1989, the National Party members went to the leadership. They saw the writing on the wall and they said, this is enough. I wasn't there, but I would suspect what motivated them was perhaps not noble intentions, but self-interest. And so when one's self-interest is challenged, is when one suddenly, often, unless you're an exceptional person like Mr. Advocate Piccoli here, who decided to uphold the Constitution regardless, but many people just do what is in their own interest. And so, once again, it brings me back to the point I made earlier, that when the political system is more even-handed, when there's not dominance of one party, when all those things happen, the self-interest will dictate that we invest in strong institutions. At the moment, there's not a self-interest for people in government to invest in strengthening institutions, because they don't think that these institutions is going to protect them when they're out of power, because they don't think they're going to be out of power.
Thank you. Last round of questions. I had one hand here and there at the back. And you as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the issues around leadership and institutions need to be seriously addressed. I recently published an article in an academic journal on bad public leadership, a South African case study, the Jackie Selebe case. So in that particular article, I could argue why do we have failure in leadership, and it relates to that we have failure in institutions. And that leads us into a set of ideas that you can construct around the four-cell typology. And the four-cell typology is about institutions and individuals, and it relates to capacity and commitment. So what we need is we need capacitated and committed individuals and institutions. What we unfortunately seem to have in South Africa is incapacitated, non-committed or uncommitted individuals and institutions. And that leads into the whole question of education for human rights. And this is part of what we try to do here. Do not be blinded by all of the power. We can and should be making a difference. With Radio KC, I see Mr. Kenneth Makateas of SABC here. Next time they will be here doing a broadcast countrywide so we can spread this message. We need to improve the functioning of the capacity and the commitment of our individuals and institutions. And that is a big task in terms of training and education. And it's about leadership. Thank you very much.
There, and then at the table here.
A common thread in all our discussions on constitutionalism becomes even nauseating because I have now developed a stance that these discussions are just anti-ANC, anti-government bashing exercises. Because one matter that always comes up is the one-party state, its impact on institutions, and now even more nauseating, the notion of a failed state. Almost forgetting that the budget of the public protector tripled over the last 5 years. Ministers and police generals have been removed on recommendation by the public protector. And no one is talking about what's happening in the Western Cape, for instance, what's happening here. When Heritage Western Cape and the Language Committee failed to appear in front of the legislature standing committee, and where the Western Cape Education Department taking 18 months to respond to a claim investigated by the South African Human Rights Commission. All this talk is as if ANC people or ANC members and even government officials cannot be pro-constitution and cannot raise to defend the constitution. And I think that is perhaps why people, ordinary people, are not interested in this discussion, because this is almost like the new red herring or the new swart gevaar or rooi gevaar. And I mean, it has been exploited by some political parties in elections. And I would really like to have the comment of some of our panelists on it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. The discussion has moved on. The other questions I had are no longer relevant. But the last one that I probably will have is around how do we change behavior? Because I think one of the things that we talk about is that we need political will, we need leadership on top, but I think a lot of it is to do with the way in which the psyche of individuals is. So the behavioral change is the biggest thing. So how do we embed and mainstream and inculcate a culture of human rights amongst individuals themselves, including those that are championing it, that are protecting it, and those that are supposed to be using those rights in order to claim their own statuses. So that for me is a fine discussion, and I think training in and of itself doesn't really help you to get people to change their behavior. There's a difference between knowing what you need to do and doing what you're supposed to be doing. And there's a huge difference between the two. And the one is solved by training, you can inculcate knowledge, but the other is really difficult to deal with.
Thank you. Good morning, Johan Kruger, Center for Constitutional Rights. Just a quick question. Independence of the Chapter 9 institution is crucial, and it's been raised this morning, shortage of funding. the role of Parliament. What is the extent of stifling the role of these institutions by lack of funding, by Parliament not allowing for proper funding or allocating proper budgets to Chapter 9s, and indirectly so keeping the Public Protector and Human Rights Commission from pursuing matters in the courts, for instance, if necessary, due to lack of funding?
Thank you. Just a closing round of answers from your side.
Thank you. It's a pity that the people who think that these discussions are anti-CEO or anti-government. It's a pity because basically we're talking about good public governance. I don't have to say it, but I think I've got to say it, that I'm still a member of the ANC. I'm active in my branch, and the views that I have expressed here, I express them in my branch. They are public views. For me, is that when the ANC fought together with other liberation movements and people of South Africa, they wanted good governance. That was the bottom line. And it's a pity that they were thinking that this could be at the ANC, because it's all about our constitution. And it's the constitution that has been adopted by the country, and we want to make it work. As I said, I belong to CASAC, which is a Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, because we believe that our constitution does not mean that it cannot be changed. We want to advance it, we want to make sure that we enjoy as South Africans the rights enshrined in our constitution. So for me, it's about good governance. When there's bad governance, we've got to speak up and not keep quiet. Otherwise, we'll be colluding in bad governance. We'll be partners in bad governance. If the billions of rands wasted through irregular and fruitless expenditure, we need to talk about those issues, because that's bad governance. That's why we've got these Chapter 9 institutions, to make sure that we've got good governance. That's why the institution or office of the public, of the Auditor General, is one of the Chapter 9 institutions. It's because we want to make sure that public funds are spent appropriately. So I think that should settle the issue, unless there's some other issue around that. The question also funding becomes very important for these Chapter 9 institutions. Financial independence is also very, very important, because they can be stifled in terms of their functions if they're properly funded. I know, because also the judiciary is moving in the same direction, that it needs to have its own budget outside of the budget of the Department of Justice. And of course, I must say that our hope still lies in the judiciary. I think it's holding strong. I think it has proved how independent it is. Although at times people would see judges as counter-revolutionary when the judgments are against government, and the judiciary being progressive when judgments are in favor of government. This should be expected from politicians. So the question of funding and the independent funding of these institutions is very critical to make sure that they're able to do their work without fear of failure.
Okay, on your question, I'm not a politician, so I don't have to be loyal to any political party. So I try and take the long view. That's why I mentioned Mexico, Japan, Italy, to say this is not an African thing, this is not to do with the ANC, it has to do with how governance works in constitutional democracies. When one party is very strong for a long time, there are certain things that almost inevitably happens. There are people in that party who have specific interest, they're going to try and retain their power, sometimes through good measures, sometimes through bad measures. And I have to say that. Just because of the ANC, I'm not going to say that it's not a problem. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing my job. So that. Other people, of course, there is a problem that some people, the discussion, and yeah, might slightly differ from Vusi, that there is a problem, especially among my compatriot fellow white South Africans, to think about South Africa and to think about the ANC as if it is uniquely problematic or bad or evil or whatever. I'm very much aware of that, and I always try and avoid speaking in those terminology, because that is, I do agree it's counterproductive for the constitutional project, which I think is very important. On the funding, once again, it's a very complicated thing. The Adenauer report and the Constitutional Court said significant or adequate funding must be provided to independent institutions. The Adenauer report said this should really ideally be done outside of the official departmental budgets, but somebody must still make a decision in the Treasury how much money is given. That must be voted on by the Parliament, that is a political body. So there is a weakness in the system. And once again, it depends really on the other kinds of accountability to make sure that the adequate funding is given if it is not given. Yeah.
Thank you, Vusi and Pierre.
Thank you, Doug. Ladies and gentlemen, just a short couple of words from our side from the Centre for Constitutional Rights. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. First and foremost, Pierre and Vusi, thank you so much for traveling all the way from Elizabeth and all the way from Seaport for joining us this morning in Melbourne. This is what this breakfast series is all about. It's creating an environment, whether you agree with the points or the views, but creating an environment in terms of which we can have a discussion and debate about constitutionalism, not about politics. Because unfortunately, politics cannot be detached from the Constitution in South Africa. It's the supreme framework in terms of which we even must discuss politics. But we can do it amicably in an environment where we can have breakfast on the 5th of December, do it over a glass of wine or two, but create an environment where we can talk about the Constitution and share our views in the interest of a better governed South Africa in terms of the Constitution. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy a cup of coffee if you're not in a hurry, and we hope to see you on the 5th of December.
Sorry, Reverend Director. I had my hand up. I almost reached the ceiling. And next time, please cast your eyes to your left, and so that you don't miss out people on this side. There was a very strong point that I wanted to make, and it had to do with engaging the gentleman who was talking about this being nauseating or something like that, and so on.
No, I'm sorry
it's a bit. But anyway, just to make up for your error, could I advise something here? But if anybody wants to know what went wrong in this country, you read Vusi Pikoli's book. Right? Let me make that point here. I'm not his marketing agent, but if you want to know what has gone wrong in this country, you begin by reading that book. It's titled My Second Initiation. That's all I want to say. Sorry for